Let me start with my greeting. Good morning to our friends in North and South America. Good afternoon to our friends in the UK and in Europe. Good early evening to our friends in the Middle East. Good evening to our friends in India, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and good late evening, friends in Australia. Nice to see you. Hope you are well. We have a good number of juicy questions, I believe. Shuntian.
Question 1. Dear Ajahn, many thanks for all the help you have given me and others. I just wonder if you know what the differences are between one who is liberated through concentration, one liberated through insight, and one liberated both ways. Thank you.
Apparently there are different types of practitioners who have stronger. We look at the five spiritual powers that Lord Buddha said, when cultivated, made much of, lead to the deathless. Sati, Samadhi, and Panya are the last three of those. So different practitioners, depending on what they have practiced, will be stronger in certain areas. In terms of recent history, anecdotal story, when Luang Por Biek, Tan Ajahn Dhan, and Ajahn Anan were practicing together in what became Ajahn Biek's monastery, Lam Luka, having there some training period with Luang Por Chah. They were all gifted meditators, and they went off to practice where they would have more time, less schedule. And when they would discuss Dharma together, it's interesting because it seems like each of them was one of these types. So Ajahn Dhan was saying, when they would come together and have some Dhamma discussion, that you have to contemplate. So Tan Ajahn Dhan is known for his teachings about body contemplation and seeing the body as elements. And so he did a lot of intensive practice with a focus upon contemplation of the body as its parts. And so he was saying this to Ajahn Anan and Ajahn Dhan. Apparently, Luang Por Anan told me this, and Luang Por Biek was saying, I can't. Luang Por Biek had quite powerful samadhi, so Luang Por Biek's mind would go into samadhi for hours and stay in quite strong samadhi, and he found it not easy to keep contemplating. And Luang Por Biek, Ajahn Anan was kind of in the middle. He was like, well, he could do both. He could enter samadhi and stay, or he could direct his mind towards contemplation. So you had those three types practicing together. But so I think it's, I'm probably, compared to many Western monks, I'm probably more of a samatha type. I like the samatha practices, the Brahmavihara practices, Devanusati, Buddhanusati. I like to sit for long sessions. And it depends, I think, on what you've cultivated in the past. This is not our first lifetime of practicing. Some people will have done a lot of reflection, a lot of study. Some people, it's almost like they can't understand it if it's too simple. It needs to be complicated for them to understand it. And I find this a bit strange, but I observe it all the time, that a lot of people just need to keep studying so that they can understand Buddhism. And from what I can see, it's really not that difficult. So from my perspective, it's like you do a few practices a lot consistently, you develop insight, you develop samadhi. But other people want to read these suttas, those suttas, this tradition, that tradition, to keep the Dhamma reflection, Dhamma Vichaya, part of the 7 factors of enlightenment, going. But there are different types. Mahamoggallana was different to Sariputta, and they're good in different ways. But as I have faith, and most of us in Luang Por Chah's lineage understand, that Luang Por Biek and Ajahn Anan and Ajahn Dhan all progressed in their practice to completion. So cultivating in the way that was suitable for them, they all progressed. So apparently it's possible, even with the Metta jhana, to liberate oneself to the point of being an arahant. But that requires really extraordinary samadhi, very good mindfulness. So the way a person, so this would be appropriate for someone with a lot of samadhi. So if a person, the way it's done is a person enters metta jhana, and then as they come out of the metta jhana, the mindfulness observes the way the samadhi comes out of the appana state, is in an upajjhara state, probably refined upajjhara, intermediate upajjhara, that's neighborhood concentration, coarse upajjhara, and the practitioner is able to observe that the radiant mind that was peaceful with loving kindness becomes a little more coarse, a little more ordinary, and the person can have deep insight into impermanence, see not self, and experience nibbana. Lord Buddha describes that mode of liberation as being the most beautiful. It's the most beautiful. Suppose you have a divine eye and you can see that a person's mind is bright with radiant loving kindness. And then they come out of that jhanic state, and then it kind of all of the delusion is exploded out of the mind as the mindfulness and concentration, like diamond-like clarity, shines out of the brightness when the person sees anicca and anatta. So a person with very good samadhi, and which is rare in this day and age, but it's possible. It's good to know in terms of a theory it's possible. But for people who think a lot, this is where we use the thinking mind to cultivate. So this would be the wisdom approach, and you use a thinking mind to bring the mind to peace. But the important thing is that one's thinking is within clear parameters. So suppose you're taking mindfulness of death as your contemplation, then you're thinking of the ways that you might die today, or whether it's possible that you might die today, or maybe you're recollecting the people who you knew who have already passed away, your pets, your grandparents, your great-parents, or neighbors, people who knew of. You kind of set parameters and you think within those constraints. And then if you do, that does lead people's minds to a peaceful state. Contemplation of death doesn't lead to the jhanic state, but it does lead to a state quite close to it, and very peaceful. And it does chip away at the grasping at things of being permanent and ripens the mind for deeper insight. So recollection of death was one of Ajahn Anand's main practices for the first 4 years of his bhikkhu life. And he was able to stay in this, what they call neighborhood concentration, on the verge of jhana for many hours, many days, sometimes weeks. And then when Ajahn Anand, he's like I would see Ajahn Anand as being as a combination, the insight and concentration, that he was able to use his reflective mind, but then he was able to experience great peace for long durations of time through using his reflective mind. So he's a kind of a classic example of a combination of wise focused thought with quite a bit of concentration. When Ajahn Anand changed his recollection to be body parts, and the body parts as being elements, then he at the jhanic states, appana samadhi, developed deeper, and so did the insight. When the concentration got deeper, the insight got deeper. I don't know as much about how Luang Por Biek burned off his final fetters, but I do know that he's renowned for having extraordinary samadhi, and I should ask him next time I see him. I'm closer to Ajahn Anand. So in a way, we have to play to our strengths, and then, but the focused contemplative mind can lead to peaceful states. But it's also important to let the mind be peaceful when it does become peaceful. This is something of a misunderstanding that some practitioners have, or people tell them, don't be attached to samadhi, don't get attached to peacefulness. And it's like, actually, whatever peacefulness you do experience, I would recommend that you cherish it and nurture it and allow it to deepen. The advice to not be attached to samadhi is advice that is suitable for people who like go into jhanic states for weeks on end. And if you don't yet have that problem, you don't need to worry about a few moments of peacefulness. If your mind becomes peaceful, allow it to be peaceful. It will come out of a peaceful state of its own accord when it has filled up with as much peace as it will fill up with. And that is a very good time to do further reflection. It's a bit like a hand washing the other hand. You use contemplation and the mind becomes peaceful. Then when the mind comes out of that peace, you use the foundation of the peacefulness to deepen and further your contemplation, like two hands washing each other. That's how most modern people have to practice. I've been doing the practice for 30 years, so my mind inclines more towards samatha. I find it, yeah, I like peacefulness. So.
Question 2. Dear Ajahn, you have talked a bit about the rebirth process. Is it up to the mind which next birth it wants to take? I thought it was up to karma. Please clarify. Thank you.
I don't think you can really separate these two things. So, mind, you're talking about how it's experienced in conventional reality. So, as it says in the Dhammapada, mind is the forerunner. So, and then it's your mind having a thought, you grasp at a thought, you want to say something, you believe that thought, you say something, you think about doing something, you do that thing. So the mind is causing one to create karma, and even thoughts create karma as well, more subtle karma. But speech makes more karma, action makes even more karma. So at the time of death, you've got the karma of all of your wholesome, neutral, and unwholesome actions of body, speech, and mind as the kind of Ajahn Chah explains that it's the average of your life is where the likely rebirth is going to go. So if you've on average had a mind like a human being, if that's been your baseline, if you've mostly been human, so sometimes you can get really stuck into a contentious argument with somebody, and maybe at that time his mind is more like a dog, snapping and biting and gnarling and gnashing teeth. Okay, well, everybody has moments like that. Other times your mind might be like a deva at the end of your chanting, while you're meditating, you have a mind like a deva. But if your baseline is human, then it's likely you'll be born human. If you keep your precepts strictly, if you chant several times a day, listen to Dharma talks, meditate more and more, then your mind is like a deva more often, then much more likely you'll be born as a deva. If you get more and more contentious, or more and more depressed, or more and more sad, or more and more angry the older you get, collect grudges and keep picking them like scabs, then it won't be so good for your rebirth destination. This is why we have to practice forgiveness. We have to keep clearing out the mind of its accumulated grudges, contemplate karma, forgive people actively, consciously. This produces merit. So, but the other thing is the last mind moment. So Lord Buddha himself says in a sutta, it's like, even if you've been a good person or even if you've been a bad person, it's like throwing up a stick, because you also have the karmas of your previous million lives, at least. Let's just say a million, because that's a number we can imagine. You suppose you've got the karmas of a million previous lives. Some very, very potent merits, some very, very heavy demerit. You don't know which end of that stick is going to land right at that moment. So we have karma is quite complex, difficult to understand because of all of the previous past lives as well. And then also kind of group karmas, national karmas, global karma. So it's there's many layers of it. We can talk generally. So yes, the karma of this lifetime will be probably the most potent, the average level that your mind has been on. Then your last moments. But it's good to contemplate death and set our clear aspiration before we get to that point about wanting to be reborn in a place where we can continue our Dharma practice. This is really important. You don't want to be kind of thinking about it, trying to think about it at the last minute. And in general, I recommend to people that they don't have to think too much about the details. Like you don't set the intention to be born in Thailand or as a male so you can become a bhikkhu or whatever, because you don't know what the standard of the bhikkhus will be in Thailand. You don't even know if Buddhism will last in Thailand, how much longer it lasts, because it does rise, stay for some time, and cease in wherever it has thrived. We simply set the intention. May I be reborn in a place where I will be able to practice, where I will meet with Buddha Dhamma, and where I will be able to practice Buddha Dhamma. And that's enough. You have a lot of faith, you have a very strong intention to keep practicing. And if you can just be with Buddha as you're dying, the more meditation you can do, familiarize yourself with those words. Buddha, 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 Buddha. Obviously, the mind is going to go close to Buddhism. It's going to go where Buddhas are, because that's what the mind is thinking of. That's what the mind is cherishing. So yes, it's calm and the mind working together. And mind is the forerunner. So we do some preparation, set our aspirations. One of the most important things is the capacity to be still and present and truly aware of what is happening. That's going to have the very best effect on your rebirth. So we were just talking about that in the guided meditation, bringing about a palpable sense of presence of mind and clarity. You know what your body's doing, you know what your thoughts are doing, you know where your emotions are at, and not completely identified with them. Some space around them, some clarity around them. The intention to keep honoring and cultivating that.
Question 3. A friend argued with me that if we are born humans in this life, then it is not possible to be reborn as an animal in the next life because the essence is still that of a human being. Please comment. Thank you.
I think this person needs wiser friends. That is my comment. One shouldn't make statements that one can't verify. This person doesn't know that to be true. It's an opinion, and it's not based in true knowledge. So I would trust the Kruba Ajahns, I would trust the Buddha, and get better friends.
Ajahn, question 4. Is it true that if one's ashes are to be scattered into the sea, the deceased will feel cold? Recently, I heard some Mahayana friends say that they had heard this from one of their teachers. The recommendation was for one's ashes to be placed into an urn. Is it also true that for those who have passed on, the deceased will only know they have passed on 3 days later? I learned this from Mahayana tradition, Dharma lesson, many years ago. Thank you.
It's an interesting question. And for people in Western countries, we'll be thinking that's a very strange question. And but for people in South Asia and people of Chinese ethnicity, people do keep the ashes of their ancestors in urns, and they do make merit and they make offerings for them. And there is a tradition in Thailand of chanting for 3 days at somebody's funeral. And a lot of these practices develop, these folk practices, folk beliefs, develop because they are based in some truth on some level. There's some reason for them. So on one level, the question can seem a bit foolish. On another level, when we consider it, this is what I was just saying before, we have to prepare for our death so that we're ready to let go. It is the case that many people die having not thought about the fact that they might die. Even people who have terminal cancer, they're not really accepting it because they're worried about this or they're worried about that, and they're hoping they'll live longer. And you hear these stories of people getting stuck. So, and then a lot of people get confused because they, we did grow up in a very materialist period, so people can't even imagine, it seems, that when there isn't this physical body, how could there possibly be an experience? The body is dead. So this is something that modern people do need to think through. I think something that will help us understand it is, even for people who don't believe in ghosts or who don't believe in rebirth or devas yet, open to the possibility, but they're not sure if they believe it. Most people believe in ghosts, and most people have had an experience of feeling one somewhere. And this is really important to kind of acknowledge and ask yourself, what is that? So, do you believe in Davis? Don't know. Do you believe in ghosts? Yes. Do you like ghosts? Probably not. Do you want to meet ghosts? Probably not. Most people. What is a ghost? So, it's the mind of a being who died, and the mind didn't go anywhere yet. So, what is that? Ask yourself that question and think about it, because there's a huge amount of anecdotal evidence of people meeting this phenomenon. So we can then extrapolate, if the mind doesn't move on in many cases and a being becomes a ghost, is it possible that that being, if it had more merit, if it died with more joy and more clarity, could go to a higher vibration experience? And if imagine it as being a bit like radio stations, different vibrations. So what the mind is parallel realms, parallel realities, what the mind is resonating with, that's where it will go. So if a person hasn't prepared for death, is very, very attached to their life, and they burn the body and all that's left is their ashes, the answer is there can be a consciousness there that is still grasping at those ashes. And if they threw those ashes into the ocean, if the consciousness is grasping at the ashes, yes, it's possible that consciousness might feel cold. And one of the reasons the tradition in Buddhist countries to chant for 3 days is because it is true that some people don't know they're dead. And the mind is wandering around the house, not quite aware that it's dead. And so there's a tradition in Thailand to invite the monks, and the monks have these fans, and it basically says, the sickness from which no one ever recovers, the sleep from which one doesn't wake up. There's these sayings on the fans, like 4 monks. And it's like the lying down which does not get up again, the sickness from which one doesn't recover, the sleep from which one doesn't wake up. And so suppose your mind is there, your disembodied consciousness is there. And people say, but how could it be? Because the body died. How could it be there? Okay, there is mind, and there is nama, and there is rupa. Okay, there's 4 elements, and then there's consciousness. So in a way, there's a form there, but it's a more subtle form. It's not made of earth element. That's why, think about it, that's why ghosts can walk through walls. Okay, and that's why devas can come down and visit through the ceiling. It's not that hard to understand, but I think people really do need to think about it, because if you want to be born as a deva, you have to have at least understood it as a possibility. If you're just grasping at this 4 element body in this 4 element world, you're going to be bound to it. So anyway, for Buddhist practitioners, you should not be in a state, I would hope, that you need someone, that your ashes are going to be in an urn and you need your relatives to make merit for you so that you can move on to a better situation. But the problem is, if you're worried about your kids, and if you're worried about your grandkids, and you're worried about your dog, and you're worried about your cat, and you're worried about your nephews, and you're worried about your nieces, and you're worried about your business, you're not going anywhere. And then you may well be wandering around your house, and you may not know you died. And then they invite the monks for 3 days, and oh, look, there's your picture. Oh, there's flowers. These people are crying, and you're wandering around. It's like, oh, I guess I'm dead. And so within that 3-day period, a lot of consciousnesses get it. Oh, yeah, okay, I did die. And people dedicating merit to them. They can accept the fact that they died. They can rejoice. I've people in the village have had the experience. The village where I go for alms each day have had the experience, because people who think less and who have faith are more likely to experience these things. So an old lady's husband died. She saw him wandering around, so she set him a place for dinner. So the corpse is in the house, there's a refrigerated coffin. But she sees her husband walking around. She sets him a place for dinner. Of course, he can't eat it, but she treats him well. And the monks come and chant for 3 days, and he takes his rebirth. He has a subsequent dream where he looks younger, he looks happier, he has a bright complexion, he has nice clothes. He probably got born as a Bumma Deva as a result of the 3 days of chanting and making merit. So it's true that a lot of people, when they die, bizarrely enough, have not yet thought about the fact that they might die and are somewhat surprised that it happened. But this is the way ignorance affects the mind. This is the way delusion affects the mind. Ignorance means not knowing. So it's like when you don't know, you're not thinking about it. When you're not thinking about it, you're deluded. What's delusion? Deluded means misapprehending. There's this sense of grasping at things as being permanent, even though they're so obviously not. We have this very deep and bad habit of thinking they are. And so people die not realizing they're dead. And and I have had some experiences of skeletons coming and asking for merit. Why? Why would a skeleton come and ask for merit? Very polite one once. I was in a half asleep state. Very polite skeleton knocked on the door. Midnight. Sampo Temple, Cameron Highlands. Knock, knock, knock. I was tired. I didn't want to get up and let a skeleton in. So the skeleton walked through the door and then put his skeleton face in front of my face. Like, notice me, help me. So at that point, I did have to dedicate some merit and do some chanting. So there were ashes of deceased people in the Sampo Temple in Cameron Highlands. Why would it take the form of a skeleton? Because consciousness was so attached to that birth that it grasped at it as flesh rotted away, as hair fell out, as fingernails fell out, as all that was left was a skeleton, and consciousness still identifies with it. So it's consciousness walking around as a skeleton. So this really happens, and I implore you to be mindful enough to not get in that state. And then people have this kind of aversion to ghosts because they think they take these horrible forms and come to scare us. So they take a form of a skeleton and come to scare us. They take a form of a bloated corpse and come and scare us. They take the form of a wounded person. So I once saw, dreamt of a being in this monastery that had no skin. It was a soldier that there was a bomb. This was a communist insurgency area. There was a lot of about 20 years of guerrilla warfare in this area about 50 years ago. Meiji Amy, who was living here at the time, once came and said to me, Ajahn, I saw this person walking around with no skin. I went, yeah, I know him. And I've seen him too. So it's like when the bomb blew up, his skin got burnt off, but he wasn't mindful that he was dying. He wasn't ready to let go. He hung on for dear life. And when consciousness left the body, it left grasping at the last experience, which was a body with burnt skin. So if you see a ghost, if ever you see a ghost, which is a bloated corpse or a drowned lady or a person without a head, Ajahn Yanadhammo was once staying in Wat Saket in Bangkok, and all he saw was this head floating in the air, just screaming at him. So, if you were murdered, someone chopped off your head and you weren't very mindful, you're going to scream, right? Ah! And that consciousness stayed in that state, a screaming, bodiless head, shrieking. So these kind of things happen. And if you live in Asia, you probably hear about it more. But I think in London, Manchester, places in England, there are these ghost tours where you can go around and visit places where there are famous ghosts that have been seen many times. So ghosts exist, conventionally speaking. So do devas, so do hell beings, so do animals. And you want to be mindful that you might die. You want to be capable of having presence of mind. And then you want to set your intention that you're going to go and practice. So you take your merits and you go. Don't hang around. Someone else wants to make merit for you, fine, leave them to it. If some devas come and lead you to your next birth, go. You don't want to be one of these people that's hanging around waiting for people to make merit for their ancestors. Take care of yourself. You can do better than that. These Bumma devas that live for thousands and thousands of years, maybe one generation remembers them. What do they do for the rest of the time? Hoping that the great-great-grandkids come and make merit for them. Nobody even knows their names. So don't do that, you Chinese people. Aspire for something better. Make your own merit. Go somewhere higher. Go somewhere better. Take a human rebirth. Don't go hanging around any urns of ashes, please. Sadhu.
Question 5. Dear Ajahn, I used to do chanting and reciting the names of 28 Buddhas, 88 Buddhas, and 1000 Buddhas in Mahayana tradition during some significant day. May I know the difference between these Buddhas from Mahayana tradition and Theravada tradition? Thank you for your guidance with gratitude.
So if it's a Buddha, essentially their nature is the same. So in terms of, is there any difference? In terms of their liberation, no. So all Buddhas are the same. They have the same liberation. They have uprooted greed, hatred, and delusion. In the Theravadan tradition, we know of the 28 Buddhas. So that sometimes there's another list of 7 Buddhas. So the 7 Buddhas are the last 7 of the 28. It's the same list. But we know those 28 Buddhas because they're mentioned in the suttas, and in the chronicles of the Buddha, Lord Buddha actually mentions who they received their prediction under, how long they lived, how many enlightened disciples they had. All of those things are listed. So in the Theravadan tradition, we have in the suttas, Lord Buddha describing them. In the Mahayana tradition, I don't know. I'm a Theravadan bhikkhu, so I don't know what the source is. I don't know who the person is that recollected these 88 Buddhas or these 1,000 Buddhas. Is there some benefit to chanting these things? So I think this depends to some degree on past life practices or past life habits. If a person has been a Mahayanist in the past and done these chants, if you can bring a quality of faith and you recite names of Buddhas, and sometimes these pujas go on for a long time, but if your mind becomes bright, peaceful, joyful while doing that, there's obviously some benefit to it. For myself, I like the Theravadan, the fact that the Buddha has mentioned these Buddhas by names and described how they're enlightened, how many disciples they had, when they're enlightened, all of those things, because I trust this Shakyamuni Buddha, Gautama Buddha. But I think just the very fact or the practice of recollecting Buddha's names, it's Buddhanusati, recollecting the existence of Buddhas. And Buddhanusati is praised by Lord Buddha. It's a samatha practice. It makes the mind bright and glad. So you can do it if it benefits your mind. But in terms of the difference, if they're Buddhas, the difference is in the qualities. So Shakyamuni Buddha was foremost in wisdom. He took the wisdom approach to his. But then you have Maitreya, who has taken the effort approach, 16 Asankhya, and his foremost quality will be loving kindness. So they're different in as much as they have. Apparently, Maitreya has so much metta, he will be able to put out the fires of hell, teach and liberate hell beings. So that will be interesting. Something I would personally like to witness, hopefully not from hell. But amazing, 16 Asankhyas plus 100,000 eons. Our Buddha, the wisdom approach is fastest. It's still incredibly long. There's 4 Asankhya's and 100,000 eons. But there's another approach, faith approach, 8 Asankhya's and 100,000 eons. But apparently, one Arahant who I'm aware of, who's able to check these things, said that Amitabha Buddha, who lives in a different universe, cultivated even longer than 16 Asankhya's, which is why his barami manifests in other universes. He has such a vast barami that his barami spreads throughout universes. But it's one of those things. People either believe he exists or they don't. And if you do believe he exists and are collecting the existence of Amitabha, imagining that there is a Buddha in another universe currently teaching in a heaven realm, if that gladdens the mind, brightens the mind, then that may be a suitable practice for you. And if it doesn't, you've got the historical Buddha, that's good enough. Use the tool that's available to you that you trust and The point is, whatever we do, we should do it sincerely. In general, I would recommend, like, I'm open to people having supplementary practices. I know that people, especially when you live in Southeast Asia, a lot of people have been born into ethnically Chinese homes, or you visit India. Many people grew up with Hindu deities. So people have different karmic imprints, and I'm open to people having some eclectic practices and different tools in their toolbox. But I do think in general, for practice to work and for one to progress, you should have like a 75% commitment to one tradition. So I think it's fine to be 75% Theravada and recollect bodhisattvas and Buddhas as a way to brighten and gladden the mind. But your main practice is Theravada. You do your Buddha, you do your body contemplation, you do Metta, you do your Pali chants, and sometimes you do some Mahayana pujas, and sometimes you might visit the Mahayana special day. But you've got like a deep commitment to the main practice that you're doing. We have to do this to actually, you can't be, it's like being married to two people. It's not really going to work. So you need a deep commitment to one. And I don't mind people who consider me as one of their teachers, even if they're predominantly Mahayana, that's okay. But the way you make your decision is which practices make your mind bright, which practices make your mind cheerful, which practices make your mind clear. And this will be dependent in some part on what you've done in your past lives. So if a person has been in China and has gone to the Mahayana temple and has done these pujas, the 88 Buddhas, 1,000 Buddhas, many, many times, several lifetimes, you might find this time you go and you do that puja, your mind feels bright, your mind feels glad, your mind feels happy. Okay, do that. But then I would take that as my main practice. But even the Mahayanas can do breath meditation with Buddha, can cultivate loving kindness with breath meditation. So a Mahayana practitioner would benefit greatly from embracing breath meditation. Helps us to be mindful through all postures, helps us to have a center to our awareness, helps us to be peaceful. So, but I think people should kind of make a choice and a deep commitment, and whether we progress in practice is about how much we do and how consistently and how sincerely. And we don't want to shop around too much. At a certain point, we need to make a decision. These are my sets of practices. These are what I'm going to commit to, and then be sincere, be consistent, be diligent.
Question 6. Dear Ajahn, I have listened to some teachings by the late Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hahn from his book Living Buddha, Living Christ. I was raised as Roman Catholic. I still love the teachings of Jesus Christ, and I love the Buddhist teachings. Do I need to decide who to follow, or can I follow both? Much metta.
So this flows on, in a way, from the question I was just answering. So I have no doubt about past lives and the imprints that beings bring into their life because of past lives. So if a person has been a devout Christian practitioner and they've grown up with the Christian teachings and they resonate with Christ, then I can understand why they wouldn't want to completely discard that. I understand that. And the question is, this person also resonates with the Buddha's teachings. Do they need to make a choice with regards to which tradition they take as their main practice? And I would say yes. You do need to make a choice. And doesn't mean you have to be in a hurry. You can explore Buddhist practice further and see which one. And there's a phrase, when we chant the praises of the Dhamma, leading inwards, sometimes translated as leading onwards, to be experienced individually by the wise. If you practice Buddha Dhamma consistently, your mind should become more peaceful. You should develop a sense of having an inner refuge. And then if you do, then it would make sense to deepen your inner refuge, deepen your inner calm, deepen your inner peacefulness. And as a Buddhist, now this is controversial, and I warned you, as a Buddhist, I have unshakable faith in Lord Buddha. I have Achala Sattha. My teacher said so, and I believe it's true. So my worldview is that one. There are Buddhas, But there are arhants, there are bodhisattvas. I personally don't have a problem seeing Jesus Christ as a bodhisattva. But to a Christian, that might be controversial. I could see, you imagine a being has 3 billion followers. We believe in codependent arising. Where does that come from? How is it possible that 3 billion people have faith in Jesus Christ? To me, that seems like a being has been cultivating virtue for a very, very long time and has a large following. And we know, people who study history, we know that the Bible was rewritten and changed a few times by some popes and some emperors. And so we don't know exactly what Jesus taught. And to me, in my worldview, that makes sense too, because it's only in the final life when you have your Sariputra and your Mahamoggallana who are going to uphold your teachings perfectly because they've been training with you for 100,000 eons. That's when your teachings are going to be maintained and last, in this case, for 5,000 years under Shakyamuni Buddha. So if a great bodhisattva is maybe halfway through their development, maybe their disciples are not going to relay their teachings perfectly. Maybe all of the conditions aren't there for the teachings to be preserved perfectly. The teachings change. They get reinterpreted. People do awful things in the name of those teachings. But we don't really know, actually, what Jesus taught. I don't know what Jesus taught. I'm pretty confident about what the Buddha taught because there's 84,000 verses and they're fairly consistent. But when you look at the Christian texts, it's these apostles and these disciples and lots of stories, and I'm not sure what Jesus said. But for myself, I don't have a problem seeing him as a beautiful, virtuous being who's cultivating good and wishes well to others. And I could contemplate Jesus as a samatha practice and rejoice in his virtue, devanusati. I don't have a problem with that. But some Christians might get upset with me because I don't understand that Jesus is the Son of God and the only doorway to heaven, and whatever current Christians believe that I don't believe. But, we have to make it work for ourselves. And within the Buddhist worldview is how it works for me. And but we also know of Maitreya, that's the next Buddha. So I like to think of him. And I know of some of his recent incarnations, very beautiful examples of wonderful bhikkhus that Maitreya incarnated as. So yes, I think 75% make a commitment to a tradition, a lineage, and a set of practices, and then be diligent and consistent. And then you can have some other things which are supplementary and balanced diet. Thais are very interesting. I mean, Thailand is the heartland of Theravada Buddhism. But you go to this shopping center and there's a Brahma statue in the front, and you go to this other shopping center and there's a Lakshmi goddess, and you go to the petrol station and there's a Brahma, and you go to the architect and there's a Ganesha, and Thais are pretty. The Buddha is their refuge, but until enlightenment, they like to pray to a whole bunch of things for the lottery number and various other things. So it's pretty eclectic and inclusive, and I think we'll leave it at that. So take care.
Thank you,
Ajahn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Bye-bye. Sadhu.
At a live audience also.
Good night, Tanajan.